Shifting gears to another leader in our industry and in our area, the Superintendent of Yellowstone National Park, Cam Sholly. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Eric.
So let me start with, what does the quarantine time period look like for the superintendent?
Well, first of all, we've got to divert for a second. The governors, including Steve Bullock and Mark Gordon and Brad Little, have been tremendous through this entire ordeal. Not to mention the counties and communities who've really worked very diligently to give us a lot of feedback and opinions on what we should be doing, what we should be getting ready for. Just to kind of revisit where we've been over the last 5 weeks, we had, probably around March 10th, things were definitely starting to change throughout the country. I think all of us were working on making modifications to the way we do things, but it wasn't quite as serious as we thought at that point. And interestingly, in some of the weekends in early March to mid-March, there were some light restrictions in place, but we really started seeing record visitation coming to Yellowstone, and especially on the weekends, and more so than we've seen in previous Marches. Now, there's a silver lining, at least right this second, for Yellowstone, is that 90% of the park was closed anyway because of snow in the month of March, and this is happening kind of in between our winter season and our shoulder season going into spring and summer. And so, we had some decisions to make, mostly around the north side of the park between Gardner and Cook City and visitor access and that kind of thing. We closed some facilities like visitor centers and some bathrooms and campgrounds and things like that where visitors congregate early on, and in sync with a lot of the restrictions the states were starting to put into place. Around March 20th, in that range, the tenor started to shift fairly substantially, as all of you know. Steve Bullock and I talked several times, as did Mark Gordon, talked with all of the county health officers from Gallatin County to Park County, Montana, Park County, Wyoming, Teton County. We had a lot of good conversations and feedback about, were the parks being open potentially putting some of the communities at risk? And from a couple of different standpoints. Number one, on the healthcare capacity, if we started having outbreaks and a transient visitor population coming in, what would that do to the healthcare capacity of the counties and communities around us? And then two, we had visitors that were coming in and cleaning out grocery stores, and stores were doing their very best to keep supplied, whether it be food or other supplies. And the communities really came together. Normally, we're not having conversations about consensus around closing parks like Yellowstone or Grand Teton. In this case, there was almost no dissension in that being a good decision 4 weeks ago. I don't know what the tipping point is to when the economic stressors begin to override the fears of the virus. That definitely wasn't the case 4 weeks ago. It's largely not the case right now, but I am starting to see that crack a little bit. I'd say whereas maybe 100% or 95% agreed with the decision to close 4 weeks ago, we're starting to see that slide a little bit. I am getting phone calls and having conversations with people who are anxious. A lot of this is their livelihoods. As the governor pointed out, there's a lot of people that are hurting. Most of these businesses, keep in mind that there was $600 million last year spent by visitors in local economies within 50 miles of this park. And so when a business looks at their bottom line from March of 2019 or April 20th of 2019 and compare it to March of 2020 or April 20th of 2020, in March, a lot of these businesses weren't making tons of money. The shoulder season, light visitation, school still in session, and that kind of thing. As we progress into spring, we're starting to see this now. That's becoming a different story. And a lot of these businesses really do start to make money going into April and definitely into May. And they're stressed and they want answers. And, we're working to develop a plan with the governors, with the counties. One of the things that I've asked the county health officers is to do their best to have similar health opinions in regards to opening. The worst case scenario for us is to have Gallatin County and Park County, Montana saying stay closed, and Park County, Wyoming and Teton County, Wyoming say it's go ahead and open. And so really we're trying to do is connect with as many people as possible. I have very direct lines of communication with the governors, with the county commissions. We had a very, very successful phone call today with all the business leaders in Jackson and Cody to discuss kind of what we're thinking and solicit feedback and perspectives from business owners. We're having a similar call tomorrow with the Montana gateways. And so for us, it's about being ready. We have the plows are still out there right now as we speak, plowing the roads and getting them ready to open. As most of you know, most of the roads or a lot of the roads in the interior of the park would have opened last Friday. That schedule on a normal year is between about April 17th and May 1st. That's obviously been altered. And so, where are we right now? We're trying to ensure that we are in as much sync as possible with what's happening around us, and keeping in mind that Yellowstone sits in 3 states and multiple counties, that to the best degree possible, the more consistency there is between, say, Montana and Wyoming, the easier it is for us to make some of these decisions. Because a visitor, as you all know, that's in Gardner, Montana, one day can be in Jackson Hole the next, or Cody one day in West Yellowstone the next. And so we're all very interlinked here, and we're standing by and preparing to be as ready as possible when the timing is right. Now, the question that I get regularly is, what is that time? What timing is that? We are working to kind of ease our way into this, similar to what Steve Bullock just said, and being synchronized with how we might look at operations. I've got gateways right now saying, don't open until you have all your overnight accommodations open in the park. That may not be, we might want to see how that looks here in a couple of weeks. It may be a while before we open all accommodations in the park. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I think what you could see is a phasing, an opening of the park. This is subject to a lot of conversations we still need to have, but limited services initially with gas stations and with restrooms in our clinics, in our, some of our entrance stations and things like that. And then a progression over time where we might start bringing on stores, certain accommodations, those types of things, campgrounds and that kind of thing. We are constrained by public health guidance on employee housing. And so we bring in 3,000 to 4,000 seasonal employees, the Park Service and our business partners, every year. Most of those employees, especially in our concessions partners, live in dorms. Our public health guidance right now is don't use shared housing. And so we're developing a plan that allows for each employee to come in and have their own bed and their own bathroom. That's good from the standpoint if the employee gets sick, we can isolate them. It's bad from the standpoint that it severely constrains how many people we hire, which then correlates to what types of facilities that we can open. So in the Park Service, we normally hire 500 seasonals a year. We've got enough housing for 160 individual units. That means a 2-bedroom apartment that we normally use for 2 people might be only used for 1 this year. And that number for us is about 160 to 170 employees. We're going to pull in another 40 or so that have housing in gateway communities. And then we're overlaying some criteria over what types of positions those are. Sanitation, law enforcement, paramedics, visitor wildlife interface rangers. We have some very critical resource projects going on, like the non-native fish removal at Yellowstone Lake that we want to continue. We had about $100 million worth of contracts scheduled this year in this park. We've cut back on some of those, but largely we're trying to keep a lot of those in motion so we don't lose momentum. And so it's a balancing act, but we are here with you in this, And we are working to, like I said, do the best job that we can to synchronize our plans as we move forward. And it's a very unclear situation. The team here is doing a tremendous job. They are working, and we'll get through this together, and look forward to working with everybody and listening to perspectives about how we can do that best.
Excellent.
So Eric, I'll stop there, and any questions that you got.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your leadership and that summary on that. In the event that we are lucky enough to get it open, do you have any forecasting mechanisms to kind of see what visitation might look like this summer, especially as I know that's a very broad question because everything from international to national to regional travel, but any sort of forecasting mechanisms that you would try to apply it and especially help you with your staffing decisions?
Yeah, I don't know how you forecast it. We've been sitting at 4 million, give or take, for the last 5 years or so per year. It's almost impossible to try to predict what that's going to look like this year. I will say that the international aspects, this park ranges from about 20 to 30% international visitation every year. I don't see that level of international visitation traveling to the U.S. this summer. I could be wrong. That's speculation. Whether or not we make that up in domestic related travel with people that, for instance, my family and I were going to travel internationally in August. We're not doing that now. And we're looking for places within the U.S. that might be safe to go to. And I think a lot of families out there are doing the same thing. Can they go to national parks? What is the status of the parks? What types of accommodations are available? All those things we'll look at, but I think it's hard to predict what that's going to be, Eric.
No, absolutely. Yeah. And I figured that. I just thought I'd get your read on it as you talk to a lot of these gateway businesses. I'm sure everybody's trying to figure out that $600 million question. What have you implemented any changes that people would notice when they come into the park? I mean, are you seeing your frontline staff that are going to be armed with masks and hand sanitation stations around the park? And are there any fundamental changes that are already in motion that will be lasting through the summer or maybe ongoing at the park?
Sure. I think it's a great question. We're looking at every aspect of anything that we might open and figuring out how we might mitigate the visitor load on those particular facilities. And so that runs the gamut. I'll start with the entrance stations. We open entrance stations. How do we protect the employees working in the entrance stations and the visitors? And we've got plexiglass screens being built right now to fit into the windows. We're likely going to credit card only, no cash. We've got some other mechanisms that we're looking at to reduce those types of exposures and transactions at the entrance stations. In our visitor centers and our stores, we're looking at, what are Costco doing? What's Walmart doing? How are they protecting? A lot of businesses are in the middle of this, doing a very, very good job of delivering public service safely, protecting their employees. And we're going to work to emulate that. In a visitor center, when we get to that point, that may not be the first facility that opens. Could that be one-way directional traffic? We are looking at a 55-inch flat screen concept that's hardwired into the back office with a live mic and camera, so a visitor could walk up to the screen and have a live ranger. That might work. We're looking at how do we queue people? What's the number of people we can let into a visitor center or a general store? If we open up food services and the grills, it's all going to be grab and go initially, most likely. What are organizations like Shake Shack or some of these fast food and other food service organizations that have done this successfully? How can we take what they've done, learn from it, and implement it here? And so I think it's a wide range depending on what you look at. I think we're going to be able to successfully manage a lot of that ultimately. And remember, a lot of those things aren't going to open until we're further down the road. If I have one challenge that I don't know how we're going to deal with, it's how do I deal with 11,000 people on the boardwalk at Old Faithful every day? Yep. 500 people an hour, 6 deep, shoulder to shoulder, waiting for an eruption, and really no good control point or access point. Those are tough decisions that we've got to think about, because people talk about wide open spaces. The fact of the matter is, when people come to parks like Yellowstone, they go to specific areas normally. The Grand Canyon, the Yellowstone, Lamar Valley, Old Faithful. So how are we managing those areas where we know there's going to be substantial population density of visitors and do that effectively? That's what we're working on right now as well.
No, absolutely. Well, before we jump over to Joe, well, one idea might be we could do more Old Faithful eruptions.
There you go. Yeah, we've got that built into the plan. We're going to go every 15 minutes.
Okay. Before we jump over to Joe, and get a couple questions from the audience. And once again, I'm grateful for your time. This was a question I had queued up for the governor, and since he skipped out on me,
You can't do that to me. That's a question for Steve.
No, this one I'd like to get your read on, is just in a person in this position of leadership, especially being around the commonality of amazing natural resources. That one of the silver linings in this pandemic, for some, not for all, has been the calming of traffic, crowds, the easing on the pressures of Mother Nature. What kind of lessons could maybe have we learned or could be applied to our national parks? Because not a day goes by where I don't hear people talking about how they wish they could go back to work and they wish things were going, but man, I hope it doesn't go back to the way it used to be. And how do we take some of those lessons and especially to apply it to this incredible resource of Yellowstone Park and the beauty of it and the treasured state of it?
I get the question a lot. It's interesting. I remember that 1% of the park is in the road system, and about 95 to 6% of the visitors stay within that 1% corridor. So, as I've said many times, the vast majority of this park never sees a visitor. The question is a long-term question about what the ultimate capacity is, what the thresholds that we want to look at, how do we balance what the impacts of visitors are on the resources of the park, what are the impacts on the infrastructure, operations, and staffing, what are the impacts on visitor experience, what are the impacts on the gateway communities? I mean, those are 4 areas that we look at. And, does this summer present some opportunities to maybe evaluate what some different changes may look like? Potentially. But that's a work in progress. And of all of the things that I deal with and the differences of opinion on how Yellowstone should be managed and what we should or shouldn't be doing, any conversations about restrictions in visitation, reservation systems, visitation caps are highly controversial and very, very charged with passion and emotion.
I figure. Absolutely. I respect that. And thank you for diving into that. But Joe, do you have a couple questions from the viewers?
Yeah, sure do, Eric. Cam, this comes from Alexandra. A lot of seasonal employees are international. What measures are you taking to combat this lack of international workers in the event that the international travel ban is not lifted?
Yeah, so it's a good question, Alex. I think we have generally pushed pause for seasonal hiring right now. And we're working through of the people that we are going to hire, where they're coming from, what's going to change. For instance, someone is offered a job today and there's a restriction internationally on a J1 visa or something like that. The answer might be you can't come to the country to work. We don't necessarily want to say you'll never come here to work, because we may be looking at a situation in July or August where we actually need that person. Maybe they're still available. And so, we're looking at how many, and this is a big concern for the communities right now, whether it's contractors that are still coming in, whether it's the seasonal employees. Remember, for us to ramp up to anywhere close to full capacity, even 50% is thousands of employees coming to the park. And so at this particular moment, a lot of these gateways don't necessarily want that. And so we're trying to figure out how to ease into that and not be unprepared should the park open and not have the right staff, but not necessarily have staff too early and have them sitting around type of thing. And so we're balancing that and also figuring out when they get hired, what types of processes and protocols do we want them to go through, isolation, some type of quarantine, and not necessarily you show up one day from somewhere and you start working the next. And so we're navigating that, but it's an excellent question.
There's a lot to consider there. This one comes from Candace. Delaware North and Xanterra are looking at a May 27th opening tentatively. What, if anything, does that do to the park opening to taking visitors?
So let's revisit where that May 27th date came from. About, what's the date? About a month ago exactly. And we're having a lot of conversations with not only the incredible general managers and vice presidents on the ground here, but the CEOs of Xanterra and Delaware North. We have very good communications. A month ago, March 20th, we thought we need to set something on the horizon. This can't be just indefinite, who knows when it's going to happen type of thing. So we thought that Memorial Day looked like a good kind of target date maybe for some of these businesses to start up. Understanding that you don't just flip a switch, like I said earlier, and staff shows up and you open the facility, that there's a lead time of getting someone hired in the park, set up, oriented, all those types of things. And so we set Memorial Day. That kind of got out. We kind of said that's what we're going to look at. We also said back on March 20th that on around now, and we had this conversation last Friday, we would look at whether Memorial Day was feasible or not. And the answer to that is it's probably feasible for some things, maybe not others, but we are still not sure. And a lot of that depends on everything that the governor just talked about in relationship to where we are here in the next couple of weeks, what the restrictions are, not only in Gardner and West Yellowstone and Cook City, but also in Cody and Jackson and other places, on what we set for an opening date. So what I would suggest is that it's a range. And the range might be, maybe look at it from the standpoint that initially we'd have very limited services. As things started to ease, we started to bring on a few stores, and between, I'm just throwing this out there, so don't quote me. May 15th and June 1st, we're going to try to get all of the stores open. And simultaneously, Xanterra is looking at where things are with us. And between, May 15th and June 1st, they're going to try to get all of the cabins open in the park. No hotels, maybe right away or something like that. And we're going to open up all the gas stations, and we're going to open up 2 of the visitor centers, or I don't know what that looks like, but we're going to monitor this with the states, with the county health officers as we move along, and we trying to give ourselves enough lead time that when we think it's okay and safe to start opening some of these, then we can probably start setting more concrete dates, Joe.
Got it. Well, thanks for that very much. This last one from Tim. Will any of the planned road and infrastructure construction projects planned for 2020 be deferred as a result of this situation?
Yeah, that's a good question, Tim. I'm reluctant to do that. We've got a lot of great partners, supporters in Congress and in federal highways, and great teams here that have put together packages that have been very competitive for federal funding and other funding. One section, a $30 million project that's going on between Tower and Mount Washburn. That section of road hasn't been worked on substantially since the 1930s. We need to do it. And to me, it's worth it for us to try to mitigate the risk to the contractors and those types of folks coming in to get the work done. And quite frankly, this might be a great year for us to do it. If we don't do it, we potentially lose some of the funding for later. We may not be able to do it for a lot longer. So there are some projects. We're moving full steam ahead on improving housing in Yellowstone. We just awarded a very substantial contract for that. Trailers are being trucked out of here on a regular basis. That's going to be a new day for seasonal housing in the park. And there's just things like that I feel like we need to just kind of work through and try to do the best job we can to lower the risk, but they're too important not to do. There are some projects that weren't necessarily pot committed, we weren't fully committed on yet for one reason or another, that we can easily push into future years and not jeopardize funding streams and that kind of thing. And in some of those cases, we are pushing some, but we're still going to move forward. You know, the North Entrance project here is going to move forward. You know, it's a $10 million project, and I think that it's important that we keep focus on some of those important things. It's a good question, though.
Gotcha. Well, thanks so much, and you know, good luck to you going forward. You got a lot to do.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Cam. I really appreciate you joining us. And on behalf of everyone in Big Sky, we're grateful for all the hard work the park employees do. It's an amazing treasured resource. So thank you, and really grateful for your time today.
Yeah, let me just say one last thing, Eric, and that is that I truly look at this as we're all in this together. And, you know, there are a lot of opinions out there. And while there was great consensus on closing, I know that that's probably not possible on the opening decision, but I really do feel like we can make that easier just by having good communications and support and kind of understanding of different perspectives. So I appreciate you having me on here tonight.